me in welcoming Chris Hackett.
Thanks. As a design and industrial designer by training, so we'll start with that. I studied at the University of Cincinnati, and how many of you know what industrial design is? Do we have any industrial designers in the room? This is the other thing that I like to do in, as a designer, I'm very interested in research ahead of whatever it is I'm about to do. So I'm kind of interested in researching who you guys are and what you do. No industrial designers, very interesting. Any designers at all? Other kinds of designers? Few. What kind? Architecture, any graphic design? Any mechanical engineering? That's interesting. You consider yourself a designer. That's a good thing. I'm really happy to hear that because the process of design is a continuum. It's not a stop and a start. So, who else? Business people. A couple of business people. Other engineering school folks. What kinds of engineering? Okay. The business folks are marketing, MBA, entrepreneurs. Anybody else? Who have I missed? Health, medical stuff. Okay. I know. It's because I get tired of talking to medical people. So I do a lot of that. So what I want to tell you a little bit about what we're going to do. I'm going to talk, I think, for about 15 minutes and tell you a little bit about what we do at J&J in design, give you a little bit of overview of design and how it works in my life, and a little bit of philosophical part of what that means. The other thing I'm going to do is a forced review of environmental sustainability, because every time I talk to anybody under the age of 50, I try to get them to think about sustainability in a different way. So I'm going to do that as part of this as well. So be forewarned. So the logic of what we do is about making a difference through design, about making sure that we're using design as an activity that makes a difference, and also makes a difference by design, because I think George's description of what design is he described it as overly wordy. I thought it was pretty succinct and better than most definitions of design. The reality is design is an activity that is about having an influence or or acting on some activity, object, place, thing, and applying some rules and ideas around it to make it something else, to make it function more perfectly. So, making a difference by design is a really important part of what we do. We are engaged in making products as a company, and my role at J&J is to engage design in that process of making products. So you'll hear quite a bit about that as we go through it. And no small part of that is helping people. If you're a healthcare company like Johnson & Johnson, I'm assuming all of you know who Johnson & Johnson is, probably had baby shampoo poured on you when you were a kid, and there are lots of other J&J products that are out there that are currently being used, I hope, by you guys. But what we are really talking about is the interaction between business and designers. And so I always use this kind of explanation of what's going on in this connection between the process of designing something and the process of marketing something. The marketers are all from Mars. They all want to go really fast. They have this, or from Mercury, they want to go really fast. They have this speed thing, their little wings on the backs of their feet, because the faster you get the product to market, the sooner you start making money, right? So the business people want to do things very quickly. Designers, on the other hand, are from Pluto, and that's because we're from an outer planet. We might not be a planet at all. We're in a kind of little optical orbit that's going somewhere, not just the straight line to get something done. The combination of those two brain styles, if you will, and this comes from a Harvard Business Review article talking about how the most interesting corporations in business today are harnessing left brain people and right brain people. The right brain people are those guys from Mercury who are trying to get it done fast, and I'm sorry, the left brain people are the people trying to get it fast. The right brain people are those of us who are on a little bit more curious path to find what's right. And when you have one of those dominant, you end up either crazy for one reason. If you have the other one dominant, you end up crazy for another reason. The best organizations are ones that combine the two. And that's kind of what we've been on a journey to do. J&J is about caring for the world one person at a time. About as simple a vision statement as we could possibly make. We are engaged in businesses that allow us to really influence the way people live their lives. My office, which is called the Global Strategic Design Office, is in New York City. It was founded 7 years ago. Prior to that founding, Johnson & Johnson had about 6 designers working in 5 different places around the globe. None of them really focused at a more global level about how design worked. We basically were a company that hired outside consulting firms to do the design work. And that hiring happened at the most basic level of marketing. So the junior marketing person would be the person who would hire a designer to work on Band-Aid or Johnson's Baby Shampoo, which meant there was no consistency across the businesses. And secondly, and more importantly, the business person who was in charge of Johnson's Baby in the United States would hire one firm, and the business person who was responsible for it in Asia would hire another firm, and it meant design was all over the place. So when I joined the company, basically, my challenge was to bring a design competitive advantage to the table to get us to think about it in a clear and concise and, oh, by the way, consistent way. So that's what we did. We are a group of designers, researchers, strategists, and operations managers who apply the idea of design thinking. Have you, in this discussion, has design thinking come up yet? So design thinking is the activity by which one goes about figuring out how to take a problem and solve it. So design is all about problem solving, trying to figure out how to get from point A, which is not so great, to point C or D or E or F or G that is a good solution for the work. So we are very engaged in design thinking as part of our process. I'll talk a little bit about that as we go on. The other thing we're very engaged in is creating transcendent consumer experience. What we want to have is when the customer picks up whatever it is we're offering and looks at it and looks at our competition and says, "Wow, this looks better." You know, the key to that in the world right now is Apple products. And I look around the room and I see mostly Apple computers, not many other ones, me included. And that's because this is a transcendent consumer experience. So if I don't have my phone in my pocket, but if I had my phone in my pocket and my iPad, that is a company that gets what transcendent consumer experience is about, and making that leap that nobody else has been able to do. If you look in the computer business, no one talks about anybody else's products. I mean, Microsoft launched that pad thing recently that they think is going to compete with iPad. They made a really cool commercial that snaps and claps and all that stuff. Are any of you interested in it? Anybody? Oh, good. You guys are the proto consumers for those things. Nobody wants it, and it's going to be I predict it will be a disaster. In years past, when I've done this speech, I would talk about Zune. Do you even know what Zune is? Do you guys know what Zune is? Yeah, what's Zune? And how successful was it? Yeah, I've never met it. Actually, I did a lecture like this once, and I asked this question, and the person had a Zune, and they defended it to the hilt. But that's the only person ever. So pretty fun. So let me. Oops, sorry, wrong way. This is our office in New York. We built an office in New York If you looked up Johnson & Johnson, you'd say, oh, they're headquartered in New Jersey. The design office is in New York for a very good reason, and that's because we can hire designers there. Nobody who's a designer wants to go live in New Brunswick, New Jersey. And not that New Brunswick isn't a nice place. Rutgers is a good school. It's a nice place, but no designer wants to live and work in New Brunswick. So we built the design studio where we could hire great designers. We hired 100 people in about a year and turned our capability from a dream to the ability to get things done. We have a very unique office. We have one big table. The idea is that everybody sits around the table. We also don't seat people by team. I'm kind of a pariah in that way. I believe in the team being the larger team, and it's about kind of connecting those things as cool things. So I'm going to skip through a lot of this. These are the kinds of activities we work on: brand equity, culture change, innovation, and tangible impact. I could spend 2 hours telling you about each one of them, but I won't. What I do want to do is just zip through a lot of work that we do regarding design and how we think about it. This one is an interesting one. We make diabetes meters for people to blood test, and most of them are very expensive and are overly complicated. If you're testing for diabetes, and you have to know a lot in order to be able to do this. The interesting thing about this is even though it appears there are buttons on the front of it, there are no buttons in the machine, in the device. Basically, you put your blood sample in, and it tells you what you need to know in a language that is straightforward. We built this for India and China, and to be an affordable meter that has no complications and isn't hard to use. Sells for $2, and compared to about 15 or 16 for other meters. And we basically conceptualized the idea. We went and interviewed diabetes people with diabetes in India and China, and we talked about what about the metering process. And they said, "What meter?" They were very confused by what we were trying to do, and our ability to translate insights from people who are on the ground in a place like India with a condition that they don't understand and can't get around helped us develop something very simple that gets them the information they need and helps their process. So we do everything from that kind of work to this kind of work, which is also an interesting process. This is called Verve. This is for women with overactive bladder. It's a condition that happens to middle-aged women. You've seen the commercials with the pipes, the people kind of walking around with the pipes. That's for a drug for this process. Unfortunately, the drug has a really terrible set of side effects, and we developed a patch that's basically this little patch that when you place it on your back, it sends a signal to the bladder that says everything's okay. And it is non-invasive and is not a drug. So you don't have any side effects from it. The problem was it has to be placed in the space of a dime on your back. And you can't do it yourself very easily. So there was a lot of, they brought the product to us when they wanted us to help them figure out how to get it placed in the right place. And the scientists' idea was, well, we'll get the doctors to do it, or we'll get the husbands to do it. And so we went out and we interviewed the women who have this thing. The last thing in the whole world this woman wants to do is have her husband deal with this condition that makes him crazy anyway, because she's always making him pull over to go to a bathroom somewhere. She wants to do this herself. So we developed this little device, which is that little device. Sorry, it's a little hard to see. That basically is set up once in the doctor's office, and it uses your sit bone as the marker, and it allows you just as a person to put it on. And in clinical trials, the women who were doing this were more accurate than the doctors. So it's a pretty cool thing, and really help people. I mean, here's a condition that you can either take a drug and terrible side effects, or be peeing all the time, or do this very simple thing, and it kind of works. So I'm going to zip through this because we're a little behind time here. One of the other things we do a lot of is retail stores, because we're connected to our retail partners and they don't know anything about our business. So we help them develop ideas. And in fact, in many cases, this is a particularly interesting one. Carrefour is a store in Europe that's kind of the Walmart of Europe. And they wanted us to help them completely redesign their store, which is what we did. And we did it as the design team for Johnson & Johnson, but we designed places for all of our competitors' products. Although we were able to put our products in the right spots, which was very good for us. But it also increased everybody's sales. Sales went up, which is a good thing. So so we do a lot of that kind of work. Everything is designed. Everything, which is the idea. I'm going to talk about sustainability now for a couple seconds. We do a lot of work in sustainability. Tylenol, you guys all think of Tylenol, you think of a cardboard box with a bottle inside of it, and when you go to the store, you buy the box, it rides home with you in your backpack, and then when you get home, you take it out of the box and you throw the box away, right? All the information for the use of Tylenol is on the box, because the FDA says that's where it has to be. So we said, let's make the bottle the box. So that bottle up there is actually a plastic bottle, has a label on the back that allows all the information to be there. No cardboard box at all in the process. Saved $1 million, because we saved $1 million in cardboard. Made a far more sustainable version of the product because there's no box. One less piece, one less complication. So designers have the responsibility to help make change happen in our world. So the reality is, I'm a product designer. Everything I do, everything I design ends up there. Sooner or later, it ends up there. And anybody who says otherwise is kidding themselves. Yeah, it might take 50 years, but the sewing machine I designed in 1973, working for J.C. Penney, they're now starting to hit the dump, even though they've been in somebody's closet for 40 years. Everything goes there. So our jobs as designers is to figure out how to use less stuff and make it more palatable for the world. And we as a company have a credo, which is pretty cool. We're responsible to the communities in which we live and work, and we must be good citizens and support good works and charities. And we must maintain in good order the property we are privileged to use, protecting the environment and natural resources. The cool thing about this thing is that it was written in 1940. And Robert Wood Johnson, you always hear you listen to public radio, you hear the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation supported this program. Robert Wood Johnson was the owner of Johnson & Johnson. He was the last family member to be part of the company. And when he turned the company over to shareholders, he wrote this credo to make sure we did it in the right way. So, pretty cool thing. So, I'm going to zip through this. Bunch of rules. If you want to design things in the right way, use these 11 things to think about before you design anything. And if you do that, you have a much better chance of making a sustainable product rather than a product that's just an okay product. We do work in all these areas, we reduce weight. We took 30% of the plastic out of this. We saved 402 tons of PET in the U.S., and that was about $900,000 worth of stuff. We use all kinds of post-consumer material in our products. We also use sustainable materials, meaning we use solar power. So this is the solar power array that powers the consumer division buildings in New Jersey, and we have 40 of these around the world. One of the cool things we did was we decided, instead of all of our Band-Aids are made in Brazil, which is a whole other discussion I won't get into, but we make all of our boxes for Band-Aid in Brazil, and all the paperboard, when I went there the first time, I asked where the paperboard was coming from, and there was a big silence. And the reason there was a big silence was that the paperboard was coming from the rainforest. And so I was like, no, we got to fix this. So what we did was we found a grower who would help us grow trees, and basically 4 years later, we started producing our own FSC certified paper. And so these trees are about 2 years old. Those trees are about 4 years old. Right after I took this picture, they started cutting these down. That was our first harvest. and we have basically generated all of our own paperboard in Brazil for Band-Aid sets. Pretty cool. And then we do social initiatives like this one, which is so what you're saying what you're saying, by the way, is this really designed? He's talking about this like growing trees, and in this case, we were helping people who live in the dumps in Brazil to have better lives. Yeah, it is all design. It is all design. So these guys are called catadores. Their families live in the dumps, and they go out and they collect things while the trucks are dumping things, and they're controlled by the mob because the mob can control poor people who don't have any resources. And at the same moment, we were trying to figure out how to get more recycled material to use in our products, because these guys don't do a very good job of actually recycling the right things. They just recycle randomly. And so we got together with a group that is a nonprofit organization that helped figure out how to do this, and we set up a very safe, very environmentally responsible cooperative. So the folks in the shirts here are actually owners of this business that now recycle material in the right way. We taught them how to do it in the right way. We gave them the machinery to do it. And oh, by the way, at the other end of the pipeline, we get really good PET and really good paper, and it's the right way to do things. They get an income from us that we would be spending to somewhere else, and we donate all the machinery and the equipment to kind of do it. And yes, it was a design project. So that's the idea. What I want you to do when you we won't do that one. What I want you to do when you become a whatever it is you are going to be, to think about sustainability as part of whatever the activity is, and plug in the planet to what you're doing. Just think a little bit about how in that engineering project you're doing, or in the marketing project you're doing, how sustainability can be part of what you do. That was a little more than 15 minutes. Sorry. Good. Thanks. Good.
Okay, so I think we're gonna.
I'll sit here.
Yep, I think that's great. I mean, in a perfect world, this would be a round Charlie Rose type table,
glass with a logo in the middle.
Well, the irony is
that would be designed.
This is a real design problem.
That's right.
But there's a context issue here, which is the shape of this room, and also that this purpose was not actually designed.
Yeah, it was designed to have. This room was designed to have somebody stand here and do what I just did, as opposed to having a conversation.
That's exactly right. Well, Chris, this is really great, and I think maybe we should start. We're going to, just try to tease out things about process, about the kinds of questions that you have to frame, and so forth. But since you ended with this business about design and responsibility, about in a way, I would reframe it slightly as a both-and kind of solution. That is, having a public purpose, but also, obviously, you work for a multinational corporation. I can't imagine that, I shouldn't imagine, I should ask. I saw you had a reference, you skipped through the triple bottom line business, but maybe you want to share with us exactly how you and your team and Johnson & Johnson frame a problem of social engagement as an enterprise.
Well, there are a bunch of different ways we do that. In its most normal form, the credo, which I described to you all, talks about being good for patients and doctors and nurses and people. Being good, the company needs to do good for its employees, needs to do good for the environment, and oh, by the way, if you do all that, the bottom line will take care of itself. So it's not, most missions or things for companies are driven by, we got to make money, and we're going to do we'll do whatever it takes to make money, and we'll, we might help a few people. We're going to make money. Right. So it's this is a kind of reverse thing. So in our corporate culture, there is a culture of developing solutions. Part of this comes out of being scientific scientifically driven and, trying to have cures for cancer and doing things that are medical device that allow people to get their spine replaced and have change their lives and become more positive. But it's a concise thought process that talks about doing good while you're doing what it is you do. Right. And it's one of the reasons I joined the company. I have to be honest. It's one of the reasons I joined the company. And I tested them all the time. I test them all the time. I always say, this is an opportunity. It's like the Tylenol bottle. They didn't want to do the Tylenol bottle because it was a change in the line and the way it worked. And it's like, no, the Credo says we should be doing better for the environment. Isn't saving, a ton of paper and $1 million in cost a good thing for the company from a Credo point of view? Well, yeah, but I pushed them quite a bit in that process.
But it sounded like this was, in a way, without getting only into this side of the conversation, because there's a lot of, let's say, more hands-on design decisions that we can talk about, and we'll talk about. But the business of it, clearly there is a continuum here, and obviously, if the Tylenol bottle caused them to lose money dramatically, this wouldn't happen. It's a different conversation.
Well, and frankly, that's one of the parameters of design for us. So, in the process of making decisions about what you're going to do and what you're not going to do, we work very hard to develop solutions that actually save money, make it cheaper, do it from different process, so that the environmental thing is it's not a sidebar, but it's easy.
Well, this segues into a bit. One of the things that we talked about in our very first meeting, and that I tried to remind people of before we got started today, is the issue of being clear about which question you're asking, or how you're articulating the problem. And it sounds like part of the way you get to the redesigned plastic bottle is by articulating the problem as a function of several things. Goodwill. The name, brand identity.
Yep.
There's brand. I don't know what the term is. Brand appreciation or brand
identity. Yeah,
brand identity.
Right.
And clearly, what does Google say? People aren't sure if they're continuing to hew to this credo, but don't do evil, I believe is their thing, which I thought was pretty succinct.
Pretty great. Yeah.
But I'm not sure it answers.
Well, I think that your point is a good one. Let me riff on it a little bit. The deciding what the problem is a huge step in the development of design. And the traditional process of deciding what the problem is a briefing process where somebody in marketing or somebody in R&D will write a brief that will say, we're going to invent a product that does X, and we think that there's a market to be had for this particular product, and it's blah, 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 blah. What that has devolved into in many companies is the marketing folks, and I have a tendency to use marketing as the shorthand for the evil, and I don't mean it that way, but sometimes marketing, because of that need for speed and that desire to get to things quickly, the marketing people sometimes are trying to get to the problem, and in fact, what they're really trying to get to is the solution before the problem has been decided. So in many cases, and I didn't show it today, but we did a project for Band-Aid where it was a Costco product, and you guys all know Costco, right? Costco, where you go and buy 400 ounces of ground coffee at one thing, and big bags of flour and whatever. Well, we sell Band-Aids at Costco, and we sell 286 Band-Aids in a box. And the way we used to sell it was that we would put 4 boxes of other Band-Aids inside of another cardboard box and sell it as 286 Band-Aids, right? And that was okay. That worked. We sold we sold $8 million worth of Band-Aids, one SKU, which was a very good bit of business, through Costco the first year we did that. Second year we did that, we sold $6 million worth of Band-Aids. And the Costco people were like, no, it can't go down. You got to figure out how to make the sales go to 8.5 million, not 6 million. And so the marketing folks came to us and said, we need you to redesign the box to make the box more appealing so people will buy $8.5 million. And it was like, no, what we need to do is redefine what we mean by selling 286 Band-Aids in Costco. So defining the problem was really the case there. They had in their heads that we were going to redesign an 8-cent box that 4 other boxes were going to go in. And we had in our heads that we were going to design a new vehicle for Band-Aids that made it palatable and interesting to consumers as a product to buy. And we had a huge fight between marketing and design. And in fact, ultimately, we had to go in front of the customer and show them 2 solutions. One, which was the 8-cent cardboard box with new graphics on it that had, new benefits or reasons people should buy. And then the one we designed, which we called pods, which were 4 sort of Band-Aid-shaped pods that were joined together and had a kind of, and they're made out of plastic. They were recycled plastic and reusable. And inside each pod was a very organized set of Band-Aids so that the consumer could see when they went home that they would take the pods apart. One would go in the bathroom, one would go in the car, one would go in the kitchen, one would go in the garage. And it made it a reason, that experience thing I talked about in the discussion, it made it a reason for great experience on the part of the guy who bought the Band-Aid. So, and the problem was, the marketing person said, I only have 8 cents to make this. Those pods you've designed are going to be at least a quarter each, 25 cents. So it was going to be $1 more to do the pods. So we said, we put it in front of the buyer at Costco, and the buyer at Costco took the box and put it on another table. Said, I don't want that. This didn't work. It's not going to work again. This works, and I can charge more for it. So in the end, even though it cost us $1 more, we made more money from it. Costco made more money from it. 7 years later, we're still making that same set of pods, different configurations all the time, but they're still for sale at Costco because sales have gone up every year. So defining what the problem is really the issue.
Yeah. That's, I have to say, I think that is one of the, for people who are not going to be designers, and that's probably a lot of you are not going to explicitly have that be your job title in your career. This is one of those kind of think like a designer lessons that I think is just so critically important. And the architects in the room know that they often get a brief that's much the same, and it has embedded in it a
solution,
implication of a solution.
Yeah.
And it is often the job of the designer. And one of the terms we used earlier, after we established the use of the term context, is how important it is to decontextualize something, to essentially take it apart so that you can reassemble it in a way that solves a problem.
Well, I think the other aspect of that is the research aspect, where before you actually write the brief, you need to go understand the consumer or the place or the logic of what it is that is defining where this should go. So, for instance, I showed you the Verve thing with the overactive bladder. We didn't really get it until we started interviewing 30 women who had it. But by the time we sort of interviewed the 4th person, we were like, oh my God, this is so obvious. But it wasn't obvious to us as designers ahead of time until we brought these women in, and we do something called Probe Kit, which is we give them a sort of map of their life, a map to fill out of their life, and to give us information back that helps us kind of get inside their head. Because if you just interview them, you get what they're thinking about right now today. But if you send them home with something and they're sitting at their kitchen table and something reminds them, oh my God, this is a real part of the problem, and they write it down, we capture much more input about what they're doing. So doing that interview process and really following people around and looking in their bathrooms and doing that kind of stuff is a really critical part of the the research part of how you get to a decent design.
And then that it's cycling around, and then you restate the problem with your design group, which is a different problem than you thought you were starting with.
Correct.
And you're starting to.
Well, and we spend a huge amount of time arguing with our business partners and our R&D partners because they've all come up with their own set of suppositions, and they've done research, and they've done, but the logic at the end of the day is to have the team come together, duke it out around what the idea ought to be. Sometimes we win that argument. Sometimes somebody else wins that argument. And I should say it in a slightly different way. Sometimes we convince them that we have the right idea. Sometimes they convince us that they have the right idea. And sometimes we agree to disagree, but like the Costco thing, we try 2 channels and see which one works. So it's that kind of development.
Well, now one of the things that there's so much that we can talk about, but one of the things that we've started to touch on are design criteria, even metrics, and in a big for-profit business, obviously the metrics are among them are profitability and so forth. And you've talked to us about how you got into design and how you got into corporate design, in the sense that you asked, you sounded like you were. Well, what kind of design work did you do before you got?
Yeah, good, great. As I said, I'm an industrial designer by training. I started out working for a firm called Henry Dreyfuss Associates. They, for the last 100 years, have designed every John Deere tractor that ever was made. They designed all of the AT&T telephones back when telephones were all one company, not the kind of chaos that we have now. And it was and Singer sewing machines and a couple of other kind of companies. And what I did was design objects. So one of my projects was the control panel on a John Deere tractor, and making sure that the interface between the farmer and the control panel and the controls was logical for whatever the activity was. If it was a plow or if it was a some kind of grain hauler thing, whatever. But it was this process of kind of deeply complex activities that had to be simplified to a point where somebody in the cab of the tractor could go like that, and all these things would happen, and the right implement would be deployed to do the right thing. Very complex role.
This is great stuff, because among the examples we showed the first day was a little timeline, if you remember, called "What is a Music Player?" And it started with a Victrola, and then it went to some sort of multi-disc Victrola player, and then to an RCA home theater, and so forth. Then to ultimately, like in the late 70s and early 80s, to a boombox. Big, I don't know what a boombox is. Well, it's interesting because, one of the genius moves at Apple was reframing the problem.
Right.
And when you talk about sitting at the controls of a complicated machine like a John Deere tractor, it's very easy to imagine designing, if I could say, from the product out, and then it just can drive it, which is how the boombox was. We're going to give you so many features. I hope you can figure out how to play a cassette, because it's going to be really, really, really hard. And the other hand is, the story is, I need to plow my field, and here's how I get into the barn. Now, remember, I have to back this thing up. Oh, wow, I wasn't even thinking about that. Anyway, the whole story about this is crucially important. And I think that if one of the takeaways from this course for the non-designers in here is to look at designed objects differently, or to look at them more critically and ask yourself, was this thing designed in service of the people assembling it, or was it designed in service of the people who are using it? Because you can't stress that enough, I think. Because when you talk about research, when you talk about, in architecture, it's post-construction, post-occupancy evaluation and so forth, and you find out, whoa, we just designed this space based on an understanding of how it was going to be used. This is completely
Oh,
not how
not
people
right.
use it at all. And
yeah, I think that's the Apple example at the end of that timeline you described, where it went from, well, I want to take all my music with me, so I have to take a folio of CDs or cassettes, and suddenly I left home the Beethoven's Fifth when I really wanted to listen to that. The idea of I get everything I carry my music library with me in this thing is a magical idea, right. And that they were able to make that leap is
and their tagline was pretty fantastic: 1,000 songs in your pocket.
Yeah,
so
pretty nice.
But that all comes from reframing the question.
This is, by the way, a really terribly designed chair.
Yeah.
I want to tell you, if you can tell by the way I'm sitting, it is so uncomfortable as to be. So the problem today is to redesign. No, but there's that's what one needs to do as a designer, is kind of at every moment evaluate what's going on. You can only sit in this chair one way.
Well, I was just going to say. And you're doing it wrong.
I know. It's why the designer of the chair would have said that to me as justification for having done it wrong. So.
Right. This car is meant to be driven backwards.
Right. Exactly. Very funny.
Well, I wonder, as we zoom out just a little bit, when we talk about design solving more than one problem at a time, which I think is kind of one of the fundamental measures, and one of the fundamental ways in which it is different than a lot of other problem solving. In other words, in very specialized areas, oftentimes there's a single metric. If you think about the design of bridges, bridges can be designed against many criteria, but you could say the only thing I'm interested in is the amount of deflection, or the amount that the bridge,
or that it doesn't fall down.
But yeah, the two are related. But
simple.
But you could have that be the. But the truth is actually, there's a huge and important bridge design going on right now. The redesign of the Tappan Zee Bridge. For those of you who are from the Northeastern United States, it's a gigantic bridge that they happen to build at one of the widest crossings of that waterway. I forget what waterway.
The Hudson.
Is it the Hudson? Yeah. And I was just looking at some information about it the other day, and there was a reason why they built it where they built it. But now that they have to rebuild it, it's an enormously long bridge. The design criteria for it are one of the obvious issues. In other words, do we want to build the cheapest bridge we can build? Do we want to build that which has the largest capacity? Do we want to build? There's all
boats to be able to go under.
Exactly, and where and how big and all the rest. The idea of solution, that something that solves more than one problem at a time, seems to me fundamental to what we do, that we therefore create kind of both and solutions, where the alternative would be either or solutions. And this may be putting you on the spot, and tell me if it is, but in all the many products that Johnson & Johnson makes, I mean, I think about the example you gave about the applique in the lower back that has to go on a certain, the number of problems actually, including the ones that you said you guys weren't actually aware of at all.
We didn't think about it until we got there, right?
Right. Well, I wonder, can you give us some other examples of problems?
Well, yeah, I think the world is filled with. There are fewer projects that we work on that have unidimensional solutions. So much of what we do has crossover. I'll tell you about a project that you probably wouldn't think would be a design project, and that is that we were asked by our HR human resources group to redesign the systems of HR, because at some point somebody decided to fire all the people to save the money, and they put in some digital online horrible process that was automated that required, a electrical engineering degree to figure out. And they realized that they were losing employees because people were like, I'm done. I'm not going to deal with this anymore. And so the HR department came to us one point and they said, you guys run seminars where you develop lab solutions for projects that are about medical device or other things. You suppose you could do one about HR, about the HR processes in the company, which required us to do a huge amount of research. We went around the world, talked to all the HR people in the world, talked to a huge number of customers, meaning employees of the HR group. And the multidimensional quality of everything from what is the way I hire and fire somebody, what is the way that I give somebody a raise, what is the way that I develop somebody's career by working on their development process, and how do I do this in a system where I have fewer people, electronics as the primary interface, but do it in a way that people can understand it and actually use it. And I mean, it was a cool project. We spent about 2 years working on it. It's just now getting implemented, and by all accounts, it's working because we spent a lot of time getting the insights into what it means to be an employee or a boss, because everybody counts. So the kind of matrix of people was very complex. So it was very cool project.
Well, that's great, because I was going to get to, we've been focusing on, and my initial talk, as well as much of yours, has focused on products and objects. And the truth is that I think increasingly what designers, one of the real growth areas for design is not just in that.
Systems.
It's in systems and processes, because you do the same kind of research as you were just saying about, what exactly on the user end do I want to see, not just what does it kick out.
Yeah. Well, I talked a little bit about the retail thing. The idea that a company would care about, the company that manufactures products would care about what the retail shelf looks like and how the consumer approaches that. The reality is we're starting to believe that that there may be more importance in redesigning the shelf than redesigning the product, so that we get it in a place where the consumer walks up to it, understands the category, understands why our product is better than somebody else's product, and makes a selection that's a far more informed selection. So yeah, I think systems and solutions that are based in processes are equally complex design problems and need thoughtful designers to work on.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how many of you have read the Jobs book yet, or if you're how many have read it? Okay. How many of you have started it? Okay. Because this distinction is so well illustrated in that biography. First of all, Wozniak is a talented designer, and super capable, but he's like a force without a direction. And Jobs is there to say, no, this is these are the performance criteria, these are the user experience, these are the synthetic what you need to be aiming for. Is the pairing of those two things that was just so critical, essential. And when you read the book, it becomes completely obvious that they had to. There's no way one could have done it without the other. And the business about systems, I think, if you fast forward to the end of the talk about what is a music player, wasn't the iPod, it was Spotify and Pandora, and of course that's, I'm sure, not the end, but each one represents a reconceptualization of what the problem is, and therefore, where you're consuming, what you're consuming, what you want to consume, and then a term we haven't used yet is reverse engineering, but it's one I like to use. People use it in lots of areas. finding an seeing a result, and even imagining a result, and then working. How would you get to that?
Yeah, I think your perception of reverse engineering is the right one. The one that makes me a little crazy is when somebody comes and says, these people are making a product in the right way and they're making it cheaper, and let's figure out why they're able to do that.
Right.
That's anti-design as far as I'm concerned. Right. Because it's not about taking the positive creative look. It's like, how did somebody else do this?
Sure,
and
sure,
can we
sure.
copy that, which is not design activity.
No, that's actually a really important distinction. You're right. I use reverse engineering in a more conceptual way, I think, which is here's a result, either real or imagined.
Right.
And then what are the steps necessary? It's kind of like scheduling. In other words, if you have something that is due 7 weeks from now, you could just spend the intervening 6 3/4 weeks, hanging around, and then say, my goodness, I have a deadline, and then realize there are all these things I can't possibly get done in a quarter of a week, or you just say you want reverse engineer the enterprise. I'm gonna machine gun a few a few topics at you, and we can determine whether they're I'm going to try to ask a lot of our guests similar kinds of questions because I'm hoping that the responses will allow us to tease out commonalities and differences more easily. But one of the things that I think is very interesting, and perhaps it's because of my background as an architect, but the trade-off in your design life between one-off things that are prototypical. Obviously, almost everything, probably most of the stuff you do is prototypical as much as possible.
Right.
But do you have any?
Yeah, no, we do. We do both kinds of things. I think the vast majority of what we do is mass production. And if you look at the definition of industrial design, my training, the word industrial implies, there's going to be a tool and we're going to make thousands and millions of something. In my own career, I've been as interested in what I call craft manufacturing as I've been in mass production manufacturing. So I worked for a company called Dansk, which was a dinnerware cookware company that basically made sort of handmade in a manufacturing way dinnerware cookware from Scandinavia, designed in Scandinavia and made in other places. And Steuben Glass, which was sadly no longer exists, was a glass company owned by Corning that was a glass factory that had 50 people who stood around the glass room floor and made things by hand to the design of designers. And one of my favorite parts of it was that the design process was not me sitting down and drawing a drawing of whatever it is I wanted, though I would do that. It was me working with craftsmen as the hands, and I would say, okay, we're going to make this thing. Let's get started. And you'd make the first flow to get a bubble to make a vase, whatever it is. And the design process happened in this moment of discovery with the glassblower, who was a more technical person, doing their bit. But you, as the designer, would say, "Oh, stop! That shape right there is the right shape." So it was this really interesting kind of one-off way of thinking about design, but in the service of making manufacturing objects. In our work at J&J, the one-off stuff happens in more things like architecture, and we design all the offices and the facilities of the company, which are more
in your shop.
Yeah, we do that as well. Now we hire architects to do the work, but we end up being the kind of catalyst for the process. I'm trying to think if there are other one-off kind of things that.
Does everybody appreciate the distinction we're talking about here? Is a distinction between a one-off, custom-made thing, and this is an issue in the built-in. Often are ones that are prototypical. They're not the problem of the site at the corner of your block is not unique in the universe. It's qualities that make it like the corner of a lot of other blocks, and we could assemble what the problems are and come up with prototypical solutions. But that is not usually right now what architecture does. It treats everything as it's. Imagine if you got a cut on your arm and you were bleeding, and you called Johnson & Johnson and said, "This unprecedented thing has occurred. I'm bleeding. Do you guys, can you help me
make
think
something
of
for that?
something that could staunch the bleeding?"
Right.
And they say, "Well, go to Costco, buy a set of 4 pods."
Well, it's funny you raise that. The invention of Band-Aid happened because there was an engineer who worked in the bandage division of Johnson & Johnson. The definition of a bandage at that point was some gauze and a wrap around, more like, first aid kind of stuff. And his wife, he had recently married, and his wife was a terrible cook, and she was clumsy. And every night he would come home, and she would have cut herself, like chopping up vegetables. And she said, you need to leave more of that gauze stuff for me at home. And he had this idea that there would be this product that would have adhesive on it and a little pad, and that it would be good enough for her for solving her problem. Right. That's where Band-Aid came. So, and that's an interesting design problem. The design problem is my wife is clumsy, and she cuts herself all the time. I can't be here with gauze and whatever every time that she does that. I need to invent something that gets her an immediate solution that is, that all sounds very sexist.
No, I was just going to say, I was just going to say the reason you're saying this is because husbands
it's the truth, though. It's a true story.
Are so much more complicated.
Right. I'm sure I've embellished it in a bad way, but you get the idea. But that's a pretty cool design solution that happened out of need.
Yeah. Well, that is a great example in a way of design really moving the ball forward, because taking something that was a one-off thing. One of the other sequences we talked about was the evolution of the car from the horseless carriage. We've got this great image. It truly was one of the first cars. Really was, as we saw, a carriage in the oldest 19th century way you can. It simply had a different mechanism for making the wheels turn, but that was the only thing that was different. And the incremental translation. And for me, one of the things that has always been transformative about that is when suddenly a car went from something that you got driven in, like air, to something you wanted to drive.
Right.
And that was the aha moment, if you want.
Right.
It changed everything. It's not that we don't still have vehicles that people get driven around in, but they are the exception and almost the one-off thing.
Right.
So, interesting. It is interesting. So you started to get at another point about the products versus services, which I thought, you got at it when you talked about the HR system, but this difference, and I guess we've already talked about the sense that maybe the services or processes or systems is the biggest, is probably a very big growth area. And for any of us, if you think about things like Blackboard, the website interface that every class at Northeastern has now, it started out 10 years ago as a novelty item. You know what I mean? Like a feathered hat that you could choose to use, and you might upload a syllabus onto it or something like that. But it now has myriad functions and serves as an interface for all kinds of things. In other words, they just kept asking questions about
what should it be, how should it work, where can we put here, how can we make this useful to people? All of that is drives how you think about making something work differently. And the people who can see beyond whatever the technology or the moment is that you're in to around the corner to something future that does the work in a better way or does it more quickly or more cost effectively or whatever the criteria are. Those are the visionary people who see see past it.
Well, you've been getting at also this, not just you personally, but obviously at Johnson & Johnson, it's a big deal, this focus on sustainability. And I have to say, I think that's so interesting because, it is a notion that certainly has traction, I think, throughout our society or throughout large sections of it. But it is, in a way, the idea of making our society more sustainable is a design problem of the highest order, because it doesn't have if I go to Johnson & Johnson and say, this is a better way to make a Band-Aid, or this is a better product to sell for bladder control, there's a customer, there's a structure, an economic structure to support the innovation and to benefit from it, from taking the risks and so forth. For things like, I wonder, let's zoom out and think about this question of sustainability from a design standpoint, and how, maybe in your experience at Johnson & Johnson, you guys are approaching it. You've shared some of those ways, but what your take on addressing these larger issues as a designer is?
Well, I think we are the makers of stuff. We as designers make everything that is around us. And when the designer himself or herself focuses on whatever the problem is, but also thinks about the repercussions of whatever the solution is, we do a better job of making something that's sustainable. Now, I make my living from designing bottles of stuff that gets sold in Walgreens to people like you guys, and that inherently is not very sustainable. And so I have to say part of my logic around sustainability is out of guilt, and it's an okay place to come from. So if while I'm walking around in our studio and I see that somebody is designing something that is over packaged or over engineered or is made from a material that is not sustainable. I had a whole argument with somebody the other day because they wanted to use a virgin paper that was whiter than the sustainable solution. And I was like, no way in hell. You are not using that. And it's about and the logic for the person arguing for the white paper was, it looks better. This looks better. This makes, this for Tylenol. This makes Tylenol look, more clean and fresh. Don't care. Then what you need to do is solve the problem of making a whiter paper that's sustainable. So I hooked him up with an engineer in our paper group to work on that problem because he wants white paper. Great. Let's channel your desire for white paper into making a better sustainable white paper, which will make designers all over the world very happy. Because a lot of designers use white paper because it's the whitest paper, not the most sustainable paper. So small example, but that's, it channeled the problem from being an argument between he and I about no way in hell are you using the unsustainable paper, to being a discussion of how can we get the unsustainable paper to be sustainable.
Now, I mean I'd love to have some recordings of those kinds of conversations because I'm sure they're great.
It was painful. It was painful for both of us actually.
but actually to press a little bit, zooming out a little bit more, the conversation about the car, in the same way that the conversation about the music player didn't end with the iPod, it ended with...
And isn't over yet.
Yeah, well, of course, I'm sure it is not. In fact, by the end of this class, I'm sure somebody's got another thing. By the way, did you know Napster? Remember Napster?
Yeah.
That was a Northeastern student.
Oh, how interesting. Yeah. There you go.
12 years ago or so. Well, whatever. The term student has led many understandings. No, but I was going to say that the car conversation actually ended not just with contemporary Ford or something like that, but with smart car, Zipcar, and now
bicycles and
the Hubway, the bike share, and the MIT has this fabulous foldable, stackable electric car that would work just like Hubway, except it would be a car. But that requires a redefinition of the thing as something else. In the same way that Pandora or Spotify required that you think about, oh, maybe I don't need to own this stuff. I mean, it went from having a record collection. By the way, that was the definition of myself as a teenager was the nature of my record collection, and I'd have you come over and look at it. But I mean, the thing. It was
definitely.
It was the thing.
Well, it was object oriented because the album covers were all.
Yeah.
Well, so
the design
we're showing our age here, unfortunately.
Allora, what can we do? I bet it's better than mine again.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, they are. But they're coming back as a retro kind of interesting connection. Not for the. I mean, similar reason.
Kind of like Victrola.
Well, my partner is a composer, and half of his discussion is about what the artwork is going to be. And even though the artwork, in most cases, ends up being a half-inch square on iTunes, there's a logic about it, and what the vinyl's going to be, and what there's a whole other, which is an interesting design logic, that it has taken us to a value place, meaning high value place from what record albums once were.
Right. But to continue this point about extrapolating how these different products have been transformed by people asking different kinds of questions about it. Do you see? I mean, for example, so physical record albums and those big, thick old 78s that were played on Victrolas are not how we do it now. We've reconceptualized the thing in a way that is much more ephemeral and in some ways much more sustainable. And it accommodates change without stacking up piles of stuff that you're not listening to. The car looks like it may, there are deep psychological reasons that will obstruct that transformation. The idea of owning a car, if I thought I was invested in owning record albums, it's nothing compared to the psychic investment in owning a car. I mean, the way they're advertised, my son and I are constantly laughing. I don't know if you all noticed that every automobile ad says at the bottom, "Do not attempt."
Do not drive.
It's completely illegal and immoral to do what we're doing. Right? Anyway, so in other words, what the message we're sending you has nothing whatever to do with how you use it.
We'll really use this.
So we're making innovations on the use end instead of on the message end. So that's probably a bit of a problem. But in the health area, in the Johnson & Johnson area, I'm wondering if you or members of your group are part of a strategic planning enterprise at Johnson & Johnson that is about questions like, the accessibility of medicine to a broader number of people, different ways of delivery, in the same way that you've already talked about transforming the plastic bottle inside a rectangular package, which, by the way, I imagine has transport connotations. The nice thing about the rectangular box is that it does keep everything ordered. But much farther than that, other ways of distributing.
Yeah. So let me tell you, we recently acquired a company called Crucell, which is a company that makes vaccines. And the logic for purchasing this vaccine company was not so much about vaccines, but about ways of distributing drugs. So instead of a shot or a pill, what are the other ways? And vaccine companies have done this for years in using patches and transdermal things and other stuff. And so there's a whole lot. And the other side of the subject is infant drug delivery. There are lots of childhood illnesses that require drugs, and the cherry flavored stuff or Tylenol is kind of a clumsy system to deliver the drug to children. So we have a big project going on. I can't talk too much about it, but we have a big project going on that's about this idea of what's the next delivery system that gets us away from big bottles of liquid flavored so the kid will actually drink it, and gets us to something that does it in a way that is humane and acceptable, and parents feel comfortable. You know, because it's the parent-kid interface thing is a critical part of what that has to be. So, pretty interesting.
Right, right. Well, I think that, I guess the reason for raising that point is that this is a kind of design of systems look that is about reframing. I mean, you could keep getting better at delivering more the stuff in grape flavored Tylenol, more and more
incremental change as opposed to radical systemic change.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. Let me actually, sorry to interrupt, but I spent a couple of days at Herman Miller, which is a furniture company in Michigan this week, and they have a whole project going on about changing the nature of work, because what they make are tables and chairs and furniture. They're realizing that the way work environments are changing, that they have to get ahead of that, or they're going to be making dinosaur tables instead of whatever it is that people are going to work on in the future. The nature of mobility, how people don't want to work in offices, how offices have changed, that the guy in the corner office is no longer really in a corner office, we did a study. One of the reasons I did this is that we're doing some work on our offices in J&J. We discovered that in all of the, we put monitors in chairs so that we could see how often a butt sat in a chair during a day. And we discovered that 15% of the time a chair is used during the day. That's a lot of money in chairs if people are only sitting in them 50% of the time. And now, on the other hand, there's this, I need a place to go. I have to put a picture of my children up in the office I work in. So there's this dichotomy of what is work going to be in the future. Is that going to be on your computer screen? Are you going to put your kid in the corner of your computer screen so that you have a place that feels like your home? What's it going to be? So they have this project going on that's fascinating. That's a huge system design project that ultimately will end up making probably fewer tables and fewer chairs, but maybe the right ones that will gain they hope, a bigger share of the market.
Well, I think that's maybe a great point, a great point for us to ask if the students want to ask any questions of us before we finish this. Please. Oh, yeah. Yep. And you probably have to turn it on and then talk right into it. Okay.
Earlier about how both Apple and Johnson & Johnson kind of transcend that consumer experience.
Oh, I love that you put Apple and Johnson & Johnson in the same.
So, how does a company or an individual go about designing a product that does that?
Wow. That is a very big question. I think the issue is around determining what the insight is that makes a product powerful, and being able to sort of single-mindedly go after that. And one of my favorite things about the story of Apple is that, he never met a research person he liked.
That's right.
And, I used to work for Estee Lauder, and Estee Lauder does very little market research, very little. And what they said to me as the leader of the Aveda division was, if you don't know what your customer needs and wants, then you shouldn't be in this job. So, if you don't have a gut about what it is that you make as a company, then you should be gone. Now, J&J is just the opposite. We test everything. Drives me crazy. They want to test variations on things, and they want to take the consumer's opinion about that testing process way too far, in my opinion. I believe in testing up front to get insight, and then developing work that supports the insight, not Do you like this one or do you like this
Yeah,
one?
this is extremely germane in a lot of fields, actually.
Yeah.
In the public review process in cities, there once was a time when you might have lived in a neighborhood where the mayor's office would call you up as the owner of a building and say, oh, by the way, we're building an expressway, and so we're going to be bulldozing your house in 6 months, so you probably want to get your affairs in order, and we'll give you a little bit of money, but you don't get to decide what it is. That's the end of that. Well, now the pendulum is swung the other way, and this is too much interaction. So now they'll ask you, you and every one of your neighbors, so many questions about what we should be doing that paralysis is the sort of result.
Well, lowest common denominator is the result. The reality is you can test yourself into mediocrity, because what happens is companies who overemphasize asking people questions end up with so many opinions that they end up taking the kind of broadest state for that.
Did you have a question?
Oh, not to be negative, but I was wondering if you have any examples of designs or products that have that you've witnessed failing at Johnson & Johnson, and why you think that failed, and if it was due to the design process or what was the reason?
Listen, products fail all the time, and the reality is in any company, if they aren't building failure in as part of the process, and in fact, much of the design thinking logic uses the words fail fast, which means you go through an iterative process and you begin to design something and you figure something out and you do something, you test market it, you put it on the market, whatever you do, and it fails and you decide quickly, get rid of that, let's go on, go back and do the next thing. I'll give you an example of one thing. When I first joined the company, J&J purchased Rembrandt teeth whitening toothpaste. And it was the first project that my boss said, we just bought this company from Procter & Gamble, and we have to turn it around because it needs design work and it needs to be saved because it's declining in sales, and we need to get it going. So I spent the first 6 months with a team working on reinventing Rembrandt, and we did a great job of designing it. It did not fail because of design, although some things have. So I'm using this one as an example. But the problem is that at some point, one of the bean counters in the process wouldn't let us change the products. They wouldn't let us change the actual taste of the toothpaste. And so we went out with a very cool new way of thinking about what Rembrandt whitening would be about, and we had a different positioning about how it was about the mouth and what the mouth was about, not about smiles. And it was really compelling, and we sold really well for the first 2 months. And everybody bought one, and nobody bought a second because the product sucked. And so, lesson learned. And we pulled it off the market. We went back, we redid it, and redid the product so that they taste better. Now back up and running, and it's doing just fine. But it was sort of massive failure.
Well, there's lots of examples of design failure from technical standpoints. The classic engineering example is the Galloping Gertie Bridge and the Tacoma Narrows Bridge, I think, in Oregon or Washington. But the Ford Pinto is a pretty good example. Oops.
All gas General Motors from about 1999 to 2000. Yeah, I mean, there are lots of examples of failure. The issue around failure, and it's a really good question. The issue around failure is being willing to risk failure to get it right, and then being able to walk away from it when it fails, and go on to the next thing and do it. Learn from that. Learn from it.
We have one of our later guests is a guy named John Norman, who's a software designer. He also makes a lot of reference to this fast fail idea, which I know nothing about the design of software, so I would be all ears. But it's interesting because he points out that there's a whole kind of logic for how you write software, that if you follow it and don't test early, you get really far along and you have a tremendous amount of time invested in it before you find out that it's not doing what it's supposed to be doing. And then so this idea
Wasted
of
even
fast
more time.
fail, you might wonder, well, why is fail an objective of any kind? In other words, fast or slow, why would I be for it? Because I want to find out soon so I can circle back,
Go on to the next.
go and do another iteration. So that word iteration is back in. Yeah, here, let's get these microphones around to people. Please just speak.
I had a question kind of about the process of design, kind of two-part. Like at a company with such size like Johnson & Johnson, for rebranding and redesigning the Tylenol packaging, kind of how long does that take from like design to implementation, shelf? And then within that question, like how do you sort of cap, we talk about iterations with the design process kind of always changing.
It's a really great question.
How do you kind of, and I'm sure you have deadlines with marketers, how do you cap kind of creativity to, with your team, say we have this deadline, but,
Yeah, it's a great question. To answer your first question, we've been working on Tylenol. Does everybody know that Tylenol had an issue? We had a really stupid plant. I shouldn't say this out loud, but we had a stupid plant manager who decided to leave a hole in the roof covered with blue plastic for 6 months because he didn't have budget authority to repair the roof, and it caused an FDA problem that caused us to basically close down the plant for 2 years, and the plant's still closed. Although we're making more Tylenol now than we were. It was a disaster. It will be a case study in how not to run a pill factory. But so because Tylenol was basically off the market has been off the market for 2 years, which has not made our retail partners particularly happy. We've had a 2-year window to redesign it. So, which is about what it takes. I mean, you're doing a rebranding. It's about a 2-year process, and so we've been actively engaged in the redesign for about 2 years. The iteration issue is a huge issue because the way you remember the discussion we had a while ago about deciding what the problem is. If you just the briefing process and the kind of deciding what we're going to work on. What are the reasons we're going to redesign Tylenol? And in the case of Tylenol, it was that we wanted to come back to the marketplace with a more efficacious looking product with better information so that the FDA would be happy with us because we were giving good information to the consumer. And we wanted to talk about efficacy and quality as part of what that is. And so part of the brief was all of those things as a list. And how you define what means better efficacy from a design point of view is my opinion versus your opinion. And so the marketing folks we'll put a design in front of them. Here's the new design. This is why we think it's more efficacious. Here's what the logic is for it. And we'll have said, I'm making this up, the red pattern in the background, because it's very complex, implies a sophistication and quality about how we've printed this particular package. And the marketing person will say, I just think it looks busy. And that will cause a series of iterations, because you have to get a consensus at some point in the process. J&J is always described as a company of relationships, and it's people being able to have a conversation with other people and coming to a conclusion that is the right one for the company. And so it means that there isn't absolute authority that says, I get to make this decision. Although there's a little of that, and at times, because I have a C in front of my title, I'm able to say, I don't care what you think, marketing person. I think I'm the chief design officer, and I get to decide about design. Now, I don't do that very often because that's not very popular. So what I do more often is, gee, let's talk about this, which means we do iterations. one of the things we've done recently in order to do some cost cutting in our larger budget process of how we do design is we are limiting iterations. So we're going to limit to 5 iterations any one project. So a designer's going to do round 1. We'll agree that we'll go to round 2, 3, 4, and 5. And at round 5, if they don't like what they got, we got to pick one around 1 to 5. And it's going to be, but it'll be an interesting experiment. Talk about failure. It'll be an interesting experiment to see if everybody in the room knows that by the time 5 comes around, we're done, and agrees to buy into that, we may get to better decision-making process more quickly. Because one of the things that happens is, I can just disagree as long as you want me to disagree. And if we put some finite thing on it, it's going to be interesting. So it's interesting you brought that up. Do you have some experience with that has caused you to? The reality is, if you're a good designer, that is the way it is. The real reality is, at some point in every project, in a real job, it's done. There are things. I put up the Johnson's baby shampoo stuff up there. I look at it now and think, but
This is part of the difference between one-off and prototype.
I used to live with a painter, and his process as a painter was to solve his own internal issues. He was painting because he wanted to make something needed to come out of him that became a painting. And that was, I could argue whether it was the right color or not, but it was his solution to whatever's going on inside of his head. Designers are here to solve external problems and to make sure that we're providing direction for the world on things that is from an external perspective and not a personal one.
I can't think of a better thing to. I know there's a couple more questions. Maybe we can stick around and ask them towards the as we're wrapping up here. But we have stuff to get out of here, and there's going to be a class after this, so I have to be careful about keeping these here too long. I do want to say this distinction between art and design couldn't be, for those of us who are in this game, couldn't be more stark and real. That one is about responding to problems. The other one is something else altogether. But one of them, designers deal with the world as it is given to them. They may reframe it, but they are acting in response. Yep. Well, Chris, I want to thank you very much.
Pleasure. This was fun to do.
Really. Good. Thanks.
Thank you.
We'll have to design a microphone that doesn't roll.